out at the moon. Was this a joke? Who would go to the trouble of writing and sending such a letter? It was printed on expensive stationery, the kind you buy if you want to be impressive or pretentious. Should he feel flattered? Suspicious? What did this person want from him? What kind of reward were they talking about? And who was it who knew him well enough to know he'd say yes? A woman tossed and turned in bed, her long hair trapping moonlight against the pillow. She was going over lists of names in her mind. The more she thought, the more agitated she became. She was not amused. Could this be a coincidence? Or was it a clever warning? What exactly did this person know about her past? She finally got up. A cup of hot milk would calm her nerves. She moved carefully in the dark, using the watery rectangles of light that fell across the floor. She wasn't about to turn on the kitchen light. The names scrolled in tidy columns through her mind, each group belonging to a different chapter in her life. There was Milan, there was New York, there was Istanbul. But this was an invitation, not a threat. If things got strange or frightening, she could always change her mind. Or could she? Another woman lay awake under the moon, listening to the wind and the occasional whine of a police siren. This was one of the weirdest coincidences ever. Was this letter insane or inspired? And was she just being gullible, thinking this person was really writing to her? Maybe hundreds of these letters had gone out. Had her name been picked out of a phone book? Fake or not, the letter was intriguing. A centuries-old crime. What could this person be planning? And what about the spooky part? If you show this to the authorities, you will most certainly be placing your life in danger. Maybe this was a maniac, one of those serial killers. She pictured the police going through her apartment and finding the letter, standing over her body and saying, "Geesh, she should have called us first thing. She could have been alive today." A lone cat yowled in the alley below her bedroom, and she jumped, her heart pounding. Sitting up in bed, she shut the window and locked it. How could she not say yes? This was a letter that could alter history. Chapter 2. The Letter is Dead. The letter is dead. It was a strange thing for a teacher to say. By the 6th week of 6th grade, Ms. Hussey still wasn't a disappointment. She had announced on the first day of school that she had no idea what they were going to work on that year, or how. "It all depends on what we get interested in, or what gets interested in us," she had added, as if this was obvious. Calder Pillay was all ears. He had never heard a teacher admit that she didn't know what she was doing. Even better, she was excited about it. Ms. Hussey's classroom was in the middle school building at the university school, in the neighborhood known as Hyde Park. The school sat on the edge of the University of Chicago campus. John Dewey, an unusual professor, had started it a century earlier as an experiment. Dewey believed in doing, in working on relevant projects in order to learn how to think. Calder had always liked the man's appropriate name. Not all teachers at the U, as it was called, still agreed with Dewey's ideas, but Miss Hussey obviously did. They began the year by arguing about whether writing was the most accurate way to communicate. Petra Andalee, who loved to write, said it was. Kids like Calder, who hated it, said it wasn't. What about numbers? What about pictures? What about plain old talking? Miss Hussey had told them to investigate. They took piles of books out of the library. They found out about cave art in France, about papyrus scrolls in Egypt, about Mayan petroglyphs in Mexico. and about stone tablets from the Middle East. They tried things. They made stamps out of raw potatoes and covered the walls with symbols. They invented a sign language for hands and feet. They communicated for one whole day using nothing but drawings. Now it was almost mid-October. Would they ever study regular subjects like the other classes did? Calder didn't care. What they were doing was real exploration, real thinking, not just finding out about what a bunch of dead, famous grown-ups believed. Ms. Hussey was cool. D-E-A-D. She had written it on the board. They were talking about letters that morning because Calder had groaned about having to write a thank you note and said that it was always a waste of time. No one cared what you put in a letter. Then Miss Hussey asked if anyone in the class had ever received a truly extraordinary letter. No one had. Miss Hussey looked very interested. They had ended up with a strange assignment. "Let's see what we can find," Ms. Hussey began. "Ask an adult to tell you about a letter they will never forget. I'm talking about a piece of mail that changed their life. How old were they when they got it? Where were they when they opened it? Do they still have it?" Petra, like Calder, was fascinated by their new teacher. She loved Miss Hussey's questions and her long ponytail and the 3 rings in each ear. One earring had a small pearl dangling from a moon, another a high-heeled shoe the size of a grain of rice, another a tiny key. Petra loved how Miss Hussey listened carefully to the kids' ideas and didn't care about right and wrong answers. She was honest and unpredictable. She was close to perfect. Miss Hussey suddenly clapped her hands, making Petra jump and setting the little pearl earring into orbit. "I know. Once you find a letter that changed a life, sit down and write me a letter. Write me a letter I won't be able to forget." Petra's mind was already racing. Calder pulled a pentomino piece out of his pocket. It was an L. He grinned. L for letter. This letter was definitely not dead. L was one of the simplest pentomino shapes to use. Most letters, the kind you mailed, were rectangles, he realized, just like an accurately put-together pentomino solution. L was also the 12th letter in the alphabet, and one of the 12 pentominos. Today was the 12th day of October. Calder's grandmother had once told him that he breathed patterns the way other people breathed air. Calder sighed. If only thoughts didn't have to be broken down into words. Too much talk was hard to listen to, and writing, for him, was a brutal process. So much got left behind. Miss Hussey ended the class by saying, "Got it? First find, then do. Who knows where this will take us?" Calder and Petra lived on Harper Avenue, a narrow street next to the train line. Their houses were 3 blocks away from the U School, and 3 houses away from each other. They often passed on the street, but they had never been friends. Families came from all over to study or teach at the University of Chicago, and many of them lived in this part of Hyde Park. Since most parents worked, young kids traveled on their own around the campus and to and from school. On the afternoon of October 12th, Petra walked home from school with Calder half a block ahead of her. She watched him fish around for his key and open his front door. She knew his pockets were full of puzzle pieces. He sometimes muttered things and always looked like he had just woken up. He was kind of weird. Scuffing through the first fall leaves, Petra drifted into the game she often played with herself. Ask a question that doesn't have an answer. Why was yellow cheerful, she wondered, and why was it always a surprise, even when it came in an ordinary